She texts, "He's hurting me," to a stranger. The mafia boss appears. In 12 minutes, the city of Grayford had a way of grinding the hope out of people. It was a place of iron bridges and permanent slate-gray skies, where the river smelled like rust and the wind always found a way to cut through the thin-soled shoes of its residents. For Liana, all 24 years of her life felt like they had been lived in the shadow of those bridges, especially the last two. Her world had shrunk to the 400 square feet of a rundown apartment on the south side, a place that always smelled of stale cooking oil and the damp creeping up from the foundation. The thin walls offered no protection from the sounds of the building, the neighbor's television, the arguments in the hallway, the drip of a faucet that maintenance never came to fix. It was here she lived with Derek. To the outside world, to the customers at the diner where she worked, Liana was just a quiet girl, pretty in a tired way, with eyes that seemed to be looking at something 1,000 miles off. They didn't see the architecture of her prison. They didn't know that Derek checked her phone every night, scrolling through calls and texts with the meticulous suspicion of a border guard. They didn't know he had made her delete all her social media, claiming it was for scammers, but really severing her last thin tethers to old high school friends. He controlled her finances with a smiling, paternalistic cruelty. She would work a double shift at the Starlight Diner, her apron heavy with a mix of quarters, dimes, and a few crumpled dollar bills. The moment she walked in the door, before she could even take off her shoes, he would be there, hand outstretched. "How'd we do today, baby?" He'd count her tips on the kitchen table, his lips moving silently, subtracting the cost of her bus pass, her share of the cigarettes he smoked, the beer he was already drinking. What was left, a few dollars, maybe 5 or 6 on a good day, went into a jar on the counter. "For our future," he'd say. But the jar was always half empty, its contents mysteriously vanishing when he needed a new bottle or had a bad day with his connections. She suffered in silence because the one time she had cried, he had laughed, not a cruel laugh, which would have been easier, but a baffled, almost gentle laugh. "What are you crying for? You got me, don't you? You got a roof over your head. Stop being so dramatic." And so, Liana learned to be a ghost in her own life. She poured coffee, wiped counters, smiled at truck drivers, and walked home with her head down, her entire being focused on the intricate, terrifying calculus of Derek's moods. Tonight. The air in the apartment was vibrating. She'd been home for 10 minutes, the soles of her feet aching from a 12-hour shift. She was running a sink of hot water, planning to soak them, when he'd come in from the living room. He'd been quiet all evening, watching some grainy action movie, but it was the quiet of a panther, not of peace. "That guy in the red flannel," he said, his voice casual, too casual. Liana froze, her hand still on the faucet. "What guy?" "At the diner, don't play dumb." He was standing in the kitchen doorway now, blocking the only exit. Derek was not a large man, but in the small apartment, he filled every space. "The one you were laughing with, the one you leaned over to give the check to—" Liana's stomach turned to ice. She'd laughed because the man, a regular named Old Mr. Henderson, had told a terrible joke about a squirrel. She'd leaned over because he was hard of hearing. "Derek, that's Mr. Henderson. He's 60 years old. I was just giving him his bill." "Look like more than that to me," Derek sneered. Taking a step into the kitchen, the smell of cheap beer rolled off him. "Looked like you were showing him what he could get if he tipped a little extra. That's not true. Stop it." Her voice was a whisper. It was always a whisper. A loud voice was an invitation. "Stop it." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You don't tell me to stop. You're smiling for old men, giving them a free show, and then you come home to me, looking like a wet rag. Is that how it is? You giving it away for free?" "No. Please, Derek, I'm tired. I just want to soak my feet." "You're tired," he exploded. The shift from low-level menace to outright rage was instantaneous. A light switch flicked. He backhanded a stack of mail off the counter, envelopes and pizza coupons scattered across the linoleum. "I'll show you tired." "You think you're better than me? Think you can walk out of here and find something better?" He was stalking her now, backing her into the corner between the stove and the refrigerator. The porcelain of the fridge was cold against her back. "You're nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils tiny and hard. "You ever make me look like a fool again. I will break you. I will break you so bad no one will ever want to look at you again. You understand me?" He didn't hit her. He didn't have to. His hand shot out and clamped onto the wall just past her ear, the impact making the cheap drywall shudder. He was a breath away, his voice a low, venomous hiss. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body shaking, a silent scream trapped in her throat. For a full minute, the only sound was the drip of the faucet into the pan she had set in the sink. Then, as suddenly as he had erupted, he deflated. He pulled back, ran a hand through his greasy hair, and scoffed. "Look at you. Pathetic. Can't even take a joke." He turned and walked back into the living room. The sound of the action movie gunfire resumed, louder this time. Liana didn't move for a long time. She waited until her trembling subsided from a violent quake to a low, steady tremor. Her legs felt like water. Slowly, carefully, she slid along the wall and darted into the one room in the apartment with a lock, the bathroom. She clicked the flimsy button lock on the doorknob and leaned against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. She was breathing in short, desperate gasps. The room was cold. The tile cracked under her thin socks. He was right. She was pathetic. She was trapped. But then, a spark of something, not courage, just pure, animal desperation, flickered. In her wallet, tucked behind an expired library card, was a folded, wrinkled piece of paper from a bus stop advertisement, a number for a women's shelter hotline. She'd copied it down 6 months ago and never had the nerve to call. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone as she pulled it from her apron pocket. Derek hadn't checked it yet. He'd forgotten. Lost in his rage. She had minutes, maybe seconds. She unlocked the screen, her thumb sliding over the glass. She typed in the number. She didn't have time to call. He would hear her. A text. She opened a new message. Her fingers fumbled on the small keypad. "He's hurting me. Please help." Her thumb hovered over the send button. This was it. This was the step. If she sent this, something had to change. She didn't know what. She didn't know how. She just knew she couldn't go back out there, back to the silent dinner he would inevitably insist on, the one where he pretended nothing had happened. She pressed send. The message indicator whirred for a second and then showed delivered. A wave of nausea and terror washed over her. What had she done? They would call. He would hear the phone. He would kill her. Panic clawed at her. Stupid, stupid, stupid. She immediately pressed down on the blue text bubble. She selected more, checked the box, and hit the trash can icon. Delete message. It vanished from her screen, as if it had never existed. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, her head in her hands, trying to breathe. Nothing happened. The phone didn't ring. The movie was still blaring. She had failed. Of course she had. Even her one desperate act for help was a failure. Deleted in a spasm of fear. She was too late. Or the number was wrong. Or they didn't care. She had no idea that she had mistyped the last 2 digits. She had no idea that her message had not gone to an overworked volunteer at a nonprofit, but had instead bypassed 3 layers of security on a custom, encrypted phone across the city, in the penthouse suite of the Ortolani Hotel. Vincent Moretti was holding a glass of water. He did not drink. The meeting was about to conclude. The other 4 men at the table were silent, their faces carefully neutral. These were his capos, the most trusted lieutenants of the North Side Syndicate. The room was quiet, insulated from the city 36 stories below. The table was a single, massive piece of polished mahogany. The air smelled of leather and old, expensive whiskey, though none was visible. Vincent, at 36, was a man carved from hard angles. He wore a simple, dark gray suit, tailored so perfectly it looked more like an extension of him than clothing. His hair was black, his eyes a cold, clear gray that missed nothing. He was ruthless in his business, a man of brutal efficiency and a strict, almost archaic code of honor. He did not tolerate traitors. He did not harm children, and he paid his debts. He was listening to his uncle, Sal, give a report on shipping routes when his personal phone vibrated once on the table. It was not his business phone. It was not the phone his family used. This was the phone for emergencies, and it almost never rang. The other men tensed. Vincent held up a single, calming hand. He did not look at them. He looked at the phone. A single message from an unknown number. "He's hurting me. Please help." Vincent stared at the words. It was not a code. It was not a threat from a rival. It was raw, simple, and desperate. "Sal," Vincent said, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence. The meeting was over. The other men knew the tone. They began to stand, gathering their papers, not making eye contact. Sal, a man in his 50s with the comfortable, dangerous air of a seasoned wolf, leaned in. "Boss, this number," Vincent turned the phone so Sal could see it. "It's not one of ours." "No, boss, never seen it. It's not a prank. Sal," Vincent's voice was flat. There was a vibration in the words, a certainty that made Sal's blood run a little colder. "How do you know?" "I know." Vincent stood up. He looked at the message again, then at his uncle. "Trace it. I want a location, now. It could be a trap. The cops, the Irish. The cops don't beg. The Irish don't text." Vincent was already walking toward the door, shrugging into his overcoat. "It's real. Find her." Sal was already on his own phone, barking quiet. Rapid orders to a technician. "Bouncing the signal, boss. It's a burner, but it's active. South side. A rundown tenement off the old rail yards. Apartment 4B. "How long?" Vincent asked, pulling his cuffs straight. "To get there? From here? With the traffic?" 15, 20 minutes. "We'll be there in 12, Vincent said. Back in the apartment, Liana had washed her face with cold water, scrubbing away the tear tracks. She had emerged from the bathroom to find Derek exactly as she'd predicted, at the kitchen table, a plate of microwaved leftovers in front of him. "Took you long enough," he said, not looking up. "I'm hungry." She sat down opposite him. The silence was terrifying, heavy and thick, broken only by the scrape of his fork on the ceramic plate. He ate with his head down, shoveling in the food. He was pretending. The rage, the threat, the hand against the wall, in his mind, it was already gone, erased, or worse. It was her fault for provoking it. Liana stared at a crack in the formica table. Her own food untouched. Every nerve in her body was a live wire. Every creak of the building, every siren in the far-off distance, made her jump. She was waiting. Waiting for him to get angry again, or waiting for him to finish so he would go to bed, or waiting for a miracle that she knew would never come. The sound that finally broke the silence was not one she recognized. It was the screech of expensive, high-performance tires on asphalt, a sound utterly alien to their street. It was followed by the authoritative slam of several heavy car doors. Derek looked up, annoyed. "What's that idiot doing?" Liana's heart, which had been in her throat, seemed to stop beating entirely. Then came the knock. It wasn't the police. They hammered. It wasn't a neighbor. They yelled. It was 3. Solid, measured knocks on the door. Calm, powerful, inescapable. Derek looked at Liana. "You expecting someone?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with a new, strange kind of fear. "Useless," he muttered. He threw his napkin down and stalked to the door, full of the bravado he always had when he felt he was in charge. He didn't check the peephole. He yanked the door open. "What do you want?" he snarled. The man on the other side of the door was taller than Derek, dressed in a black coat that probably cost more than their apartment. His gray eyes were not on Derek. They were looking past him, into the room, at her. Derek, seeing the man's impassive face, puffed up. "I'm talking to you. Who the hell are—" He never finished the sentence. The man's fist moved so fast it was almost invisible. It was not a wild swing. It was a short, brutal, perfectly aimed punch. The sound was sickening, a wet crack of bone and cartilage. Derek's head snapped back, and his entire body was lifted off the floor, slamming into the drywall of the hallway with a hollow boom. He slid to the ground, unconscious, a small spray of blood on the beige paint. 2 other men in dark suits stepped into the doorway, their faces blank. They looked at the man, who just nodded once. They moved past him, one checking Derek's pulse, the other stepping into the living room, his eyes scanning for other threats. The man who had thrown the punch stepped inside, over Derek's legs, and into the kitchen. He stopped a few feet from Liana, who was clutching the back of her chair. Unable to breathe, unable to move, he was immaculate. Except for his right hand, his knuckles were split and already welling with dark blood. He looked at her, his gaze intense, cold but not cruel. It was the gaze of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He looked at her bruised, terrified face, at the untouched plate of food, at the apartment that was her cage. He said nothing for a long, heavy moment. Then his voice, a low gravel, filled the small kitchen. "You texted me. I came." Liana's world had compressed to the sound of her own breathing. Shallow and fast, the man, Vincent, stood in her kitchen, a stark, dark-suited figure against the peeling yellow paint. His knuckles were bleeding. At his feet, Derek was a crumpled heap of denim and plaid, unmoving, a thin line of blood trickling from his nose. Two other men, dressed in similar dark suits, had moved through the apartment with a silent, terrifying efficiency. One was in the living room, his hand inside his jacket, looking out the window onto the street below. The other, the one who had checked Derek, looked up at Vincent and gave a slight nod. "He's breathing. Ambulance?" "No." Vincent's voice was final. "He can wake up with a headache. Let the trash take itself out." He did not take his eyes off Liana. She was still clutching the back of the chair, her knuckles white. She was barefoot on the cold, sticky linoleum. The scene was impossible. This was not the kind of thing that happened in her life. Her life was about enduring, about managing, about making herself small. It was not about men in expensive coats appearing from nowhere and felling her problems with a single, brutal punch. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Liana tried to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. She shook her head, a tiny, jerky motion. "Get your shoes," Vincent said. She stared at him. "What?" The word was a bare whisper. "Your shoes, your coat. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Her gaze darted to Derek, then back to Vincent. This was a new kind of cage. "I can't. I don't—" "Who are you?" "I'm the man you texted." He said it with such simple, unarguable logic that her mind reeled. He held up his hand, the one that wasn't bleeding, as if to stall her panic. "You asked for help. This is help. He will wake up, and when he does, he will still be the man who cornered you in your kitchen." He was right. The ice in her stomach solidified. He was right. Derek would wake up, and his rage would be 1,000 times worse. He would blame her for this, for the humiliation, for the man who had laid him low. My shoes are by the door." "Sal," Vincent said, without turning. The man who had been checking Derek, Sal, rose. He walked to the front door, stepped over his unconscious body, and retrieved her thin, worn-out sneakers. He held them out to her, his face impassive. Liana pushed off the chair, her legs trembling. She did not look at Derek as she stepped around him. She sat on the floor, on the dirty welcome mat, and fumbled with the laces. Her fingers were numb, disobedient. Vincent watched her. He unbuttoned his overcoat. It was heavy, black wool. He shrugged it off his shoulders, and the simple motion was full of a power she couldn't name. He held it out. "It's cold," he said. She stood, her shoes tied, her thin sweater offering no protection. She was scared of him. He was a man who moved with violence, who had men who obeyed him without question. But as he'd said, the fear of staying was, for the first time, greater than the fear of leaving. She nodded once, a gesture of surrender. She did not take the coat. Instead, he stepped forward, and with an impersonal, almost formal gesture, he draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was immediate, a heavy, warm burden. It fell to her mid-calves, a massive shroud, smelling faintly of clean wool, cold air, and something sharp, like citrus. He placed a hand, not on her, but on the small of her back, a guiding, firm pressure that propelled her out of the apartment. She did not look back. The hallway was silent. The sleek black car she had heard was waiting at the curb, its engine a low, powerful thrum. One of the men opened the back door. Vincent guided her in, his hand still at her back, then slid in beside her. The door closed with a solid, expensive thunk, sealing them inside. The silence in the car was absolute. The leather seats were soft, the air warm. Sal was in the passenger seat, and another man she hadn't seen was driving. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, without a sound. Liana watched her building, her window, her whole miserable life recede. She was wrapped in a stranger's coat, sitting next to a man who had just committed a felony, and she had never, in her entire 24 years, felt so completely and utterly out of control. She began to shake again, the adrenaline leaving her body, replaced by a cold, rattling shock. Vincent said nothing. He simply reached up and pressed a button. A quiet rush of warm air began to flow from a vent near her feet. They drove for 20 minutes, crossing one of the iron bridges into the richer, darker heart of the North Side, a place she only ever saw from the bus. They pulled into a subterranean garage, and the metal gate clanged shut behind them, the sound echoing ominously. They took an elevator, not to a lobby, but directly into a sprawling apartment. "Safe house," Vincent said, as if sensing her confusion. It was not a home. It was luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing a glittering, indifferent city, but it was sterile. The furniture was all glass and chrome and black leather, arranged at perfect angles. There were no photographs, no books, no clutter. It was a place for waiting. 2 men in suits stood by the far wall. They nodded at Vincent. They looked at Liana with the same impassive, neutral expressions as the others. "This is Liana," Vincent said to them. "She is a guest. No one comes in. No one goes out. We clear?" "Clear, boss," one of them said. Vincent turned to her. He had a small white handkerchief in his hand and was carefully, meticulously wiping the blood from his knuckles. "This room is yours." He gestured to a closed door. "It has a bathroom. The kitchen is stocked. You are safe here." He walked her to the door and opened it. It was a bedroom, dominated by a massive bed with a white comforter. On the comforter were several shopping bags. "Clothes," he said. "Simple things, sweatpants, shirts, toiletries. I didn't know your size, I guessed." Liana looked at the bags, then at him. "You bought these before?" "Yes." "Before you came to my apartment?" "Yes." The cold, calculated efficiency of it stunned her. He had known he was taking her. He had planned it. "I need you to eat," he said, "and I need you to shower. Then we will talk." She did as she was told. She was an automaton, moving through the motions of survival. She locked the bedroom door, a habit she couldn't break, and stood under the scalding hot water in the marble shower until her skin was red. She washed her hair with expensive, floral-scented shampoo and scrubbed the smell of the diner and Derek's apartment off her skin. She cried, but silently, the water washing the tears away before they could even fall. She dressed in a new, soft gray sweatshirt and matching pants. They were a little too large, but warm. She emerged an hour later, her hair damp, her face pale, and found him sitting in the dark living room, looking out at the city. A plate of food, a simple chicken sandwich and a glass of milk, was on the coffee table. She sat in the chair opposite him. She did not touch the food. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. Vincent turned his head. His gray eyes were unreadable in the shadows. "Why what? Why did you come? Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I'm nobody." He was quiet for a long time. So long she thought he wouldn't answer. "My phone," he said finally. "The one you messaged. It's for emergencies. For my family. I'm not your family." "No, you're not. But you're a woman who texted for help, and no woman should beg for help and be ignored. It was too simple. It was too vast. It didn't make any sense. You hit him. Yes. You could have killed him. I didn't. You're one of those men, aren't you?" she whispered, the stories from the old neighborhood, the whispers at the diner, coalescing, the North Side Syndicate, the Morettis. He did not confirm or deny it. He just watched her. The simplicity of his answer, no woman should beg for help and be ignored, smashed against the reality of her life. For 2 years, She had been ignored by her coworkers, who saw her bruises and looked away, by the world, which saw her as just another tired waitress, by herself, as she minimized and excused and hid. This man, this total stranger, this criminal, had received one garbled, terrified message and had mobilized an army in 12 minutes. The dam broke. It was not a graceful cry. It was an animal sound, a tearing, ugly sob that ripped itself from her chest. It was 2 years of fear, of humiliation, of silence. It was the terror of tonight and the hopelessness of tomorrow. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, and wept. She wept for the girl she had been and the ghost she had become. Vincent did not move. He did not rush to comfort her. He did not pat her on the back or offer platitudes. He sat as still as the stone statues in the park, a silent, unmoving witness to her grief. As he watched her, his face remained impassive, but his mind was not in the sterile, safe house. It was 15 years in the past. He was 21, frantic, running up the steps of a different rundown apartment building. He was screaming her name, Maria. He had been on his way, but he'd gotten stuck in traffic, a stupid, simple accident on the bridge. He'd been delayed by 45 minutes. He'd found her on the kitchen floor. Her boyfriend, a small-time dealer he had warned her about, was long gone. The ambulance sirens he'd heard in the distance had been for her, but they were too late. He had promised to protect her. He had failed. He had never failed like that again. His code, his honor, his entire life was built on the foundation of that failure. He did not tolerate predators. He did not allow the strong to feed on the weak under his watch, and he never, ever waited for traffic. When Liana's sobs finally subsided into ragged, hitching breaths, Vincent rose. He walked to the kitchen, took a box of tissues from a drawer, and set it on the table in front of her. He also set down a fresh glass of water. He did not touch her. He sat back down. "Get some sleep. Liana, you're safe tonight. I promise you that." She eventually did sleep, but it was a shallow, dreamless void. She woke up hours later, in the dead of night, to the oppressive silence of the apartment. The city lights were still glittering. She was in a strange bed, in a stranger's fortress, safe. He had promised she was safe, but the concept was so alien. Her body didn't know how to accept it. Her heart was pounding. She needed to know he was still there. She needed to know this wasn't some fever dream, that she wouldn't wake up back in her own bed, with Derek snoring beside her. She slipped out of the room. The 2 guards were still by the window, but they were sitting now, speaking in low murmurs. They stood when they saw her, but she ignored them, her focus on the sliver of light coming from the kitchen. She found him there. He had taken off his suit jacket and his tie, and his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his forearms. He was standing at the counter, spooning tea leaves into a pot. The sight was so normal, so domestic. It was jarring. He looked up as she entered. "You're awake." "I couldn't sleep." "Neither can I." He gestured with the kettle. "Tea?" She nodded, and he took down a second mug. He poured the hot water, and the scent of peppermint filled the air. He handed her one of the mugs. Their fingers didn't touch. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm ceramic. They stood in the quiet, gleaming kitchen, 2 insomniacs. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice raw from crying. "I don't know how to be even here, even knowing he's not. I'm still waiting for the door to slam. I'm still waiting for him to start yelling." She looked down into her mug. "I don't know how to feel safe anymore." Vincent set his own mug down. He looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face. He saw the exhaustion, the terror, and the tiny, flickering ember of a person who was still in there. He moved slowly, respectfully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. He reached out his hand, not his bruised and bloody one, but the other. He didn't grab her. He didn't hold her. He gently, with his fingertips, brushed the back of her hand where it was curled around the mug. His touch was firm and slightly calloused. It was the first human touch she had felt in 2 years that wasn't a threat. It was just there. "Then I'll teach you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "If you let me." A warm silence built between them, a fragile new thing. The air was full of unspoken words, of fear and possibility. Liana looked at his hand, then at his face, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. The first few days in the safe house were a blur of disorienting silence. Liana slept in a bed larger than her entire old bedroom, a vast white landscape of high thread count sheets. She woke up, again and again, to the terrifying realization that she was safe. It felt like a trick. The silence was so profound that her own heartbeat sounded like a drum, and she would lie awake, listening, convinced that the quiet was just the prelude to a new and more terrible violence. On the third morning, Vincent was there. He had been absent for 2 days, leaving her to the silent, watchful care of his guards and the endless, sterile luxury of the apartment. She emerged from her room, wrapped in one of the oversized gray sweatshirts he had provided, and found him in the kitchen, a fresh suit, reading a physical newspaper. He looked up as she entered, his gray eyes assessing. "Good morning, there is fresh coffee." She poured a cup, her hand still not entirely steady. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice small. Vincent folded his newspaper with meticulous precision. He did not avoid the question. "He's in Grayford General Hospital." Liana's blood ran cold. The old fear, the familiar one, rushed back. "The hospital. He'll call the police. He'll tell them. He'll say your name. He'll say my name." "He already has," Vincent said, his voice a flat, unbothered monotone. "What?" She gripped the counter. Are they coming here?" "No," he said. "They are not. But you said—" "He filed a report." "He did. He told a very confused desk sergeant that a ghost broke into his apartment and punched him. His jaw is broken, so his speech was difficult to understand. He also has 2 broken ribs." Vincent took a sip of his own coffee. He was stating facts, not bragging. This was simply the state of the world. Liana processed this. A broken jaw, 2 broken ribs. The violence of it was staggering. "So what happens now? He gets out and he comes for me. He'll kill me. He'll kill you." Vincent looked at her, and for a second, a flicker of something, not amusement, but a deep, dark irony, passed through his eyes. "No, Liana, he will not be coming for you." "How can you be so sure? You don't know him." "I am sure," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her panic. "Because I sent Sal to visit him in the hospital this morning." To what? To hurt him more? To deliver a message, a final one. Vincent stood, walking to the window to look down at the city. He was informed, in very clear terms, that you are under my protection. If he is ever seen within 500 feet of you, if he says your name to another living soul, if he even thinks of you in a way I do not approve of, he will not be leaving a hospital. He will be leaving a morgue. Liana sank into one of the bar stools. This was the man who had touched her hand so gently in the night. This was the man who had given her tea. He was a killer. He had threatened, in no uncertain terms, to murder Derek. A wave of nausea and, to her absolute shame, a profound, undeniable wave of relief washed over her. She was horrified by him, and she had never felt so safe. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I am not him. Liana," Vincent said quietly from the window. "I will not hurt you, but I will not allow anyone else to, either. That is my word." The days that followed found a new rhythm. Vincent was a shadow. He was often gone, but his presence remained. He kept a respectful, almost formal distance. He never entered her bedroom, never walked in on her. He was the antithesis of Derek, where Derek had invaded every inch of her space, her mind and her body. Vincent gave her an ocean of it. She began to recover. It started with food. The kitchen was always stocked, and she found herself, for the first time in years, eating because she was hungry, not because she was afraid not to. She ate an entire carton of fresh strawberries, one by one, standing at the kitchen counter, and the simple, sweet taste was so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. Then came sleep. She stopped waking at the sound of a key in the lock. She slept for 10 hours, 12 hours, her body finally succumbing to 2 years of bone-deep exhaustion. One afternoon, one of the guards, a younger, thicker man named Tony, was by the door as she walked past. He was staring at his phone with a frown. "Everything okay?" she asked, surprised to hear her own voice. He looked up, startled. "Oh, yeah, miss... just... my kid, he wants a... what's it called? A pygmy puff." "A what?" "A pygmy puff. From those wizard movies. I don't know. Looks like a pink tribble to me." A small, rusty sound escaped Liana's throat. She covered her mouth, shocked. It was a laugh. She had not laughed in so long. The muscles felt foreign. Tony's face broke into a wide, relieved grin. "Hey, there she is!" From the living room, where he was reading a thick financial report, Vincent looked up. He watched her smile, a real, unguarded smile, and a new, unfamiliar quiet settled over his features. He said nothing and returned to his report. But she was healing, and with healing came thought, and with thought came fear of a different kind. She'd been in the safe house for nearly 2 weeks. She was wearing clothes he had bought. She was eating food he had paid for. She was living under the protection of his guards, in a beautiful, gilded cage. She realized with a sickening lurch, traded one owner for another. This one was kind. This one was respectful. But he was, in his own way, just as controlling. He controlled her safety. He controlled the entire world outside her. She had to leave. She had to know if she could stand on her own. If she couldn't, then none of this mattered. She was just a pet, moved from a cramped, abusive kennel to a luxurious, spacious one. The next morning, she woke up with a grim, terrified resolve. She showered, and instead of pulling on the soft sweatpants, she dressed in the plain jeans and sweater he had bought her. She pulled on the sneakers. She was going to walk out the front door. She made it to the hallway, and he was there. He was standing by the elevator, dressed in his customary suit, holding a cup of coffee. He must have been on his way out. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her, at the coat slung over her arm, at her shoes. He understood instantly. "You're leaving," he said. It was not a question. "I have to," she whispered, her heart hammering. She was terrified he would stop her, that the kind mask would fall away and the monster would be revealed. I can't stay here." "Why?" he asked. His voice was calm, curious. "Because I don't want to be kept," she burst out, the word tasting like poison. "I can't owe you. I can't be this person you just take care of. I'll be just as broken as I was before. I have to go." Vincent was very still. He looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. He saw the panic, the desperation, the frantic need to prove she was still a person. He could have forbidden it. He could have told his guards to lock the elevator. He could have told her about the very real, very ugly world that was waiting for her, a world that Derek, however broken, still inhabited. Instead, he stepped aside, clearing the path to the elevator. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice low and firm. "You never did." "The door is open, Liana." It was always open. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim, new cell phone. "This is yours. My number is the only one in it. You're right. You're not a prisoner. But I will always come if you call." She stared at him, bewildered. This was not the test she expected. She took the phone. "Thank you." "Go," he said. "Be safe." She pressed the button. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and as the doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was his face, impassive, watchful, and unmoving. She was free. She walked out of the opulent lobby and onto the busy, noisy street. The Grayford wind was sharp, and it cut through her coat. The sounds were overwhelming. A bus hissed its air brakes. A man yelled at a taxi. A car horn blared. Liana flinched, her entire body tensing, her hand flying to her throat. She started walking, just walking. She had no destination. She had no money, she realized. The phone was in her pocket, but she had nothing else. She walked for 3 blocks, a man walking behind her. His footsteps, too loud, too close, made her heart seize. She darted into the street, a taxi slamming on its horn. "Watch it, lady!" the driver screamed. She stumbled back to the sidewalk, shaking. She passed a diner. Through the window, she saw a waitress, tired, wiping down a counter. She saw a man in a booth, arguing with his girlfriend, his voice rising. Liana stopped. She couldn't breathe. The world was not safe. Derek was in a hospital. But the world was full of Dereks. They were everywhere. They were in the trucks, in the diners, on the sidewalks. They were the background noise of her entire life. In the safe house, there had been no yelling. There had been no fear. There had been a man who spoke in low tones, who read the newspaper, who gave her space, who had looked at her with respect. She'd been out for 10 minutes. She turned around. She walked the 3 blocks back, her head down, her steps quickening. The doorman, the same one from the first night, saw her coming. He simply smiled, a small, kind smile, and held the door open for her. She rode the elevator up, her hands trembling for an entirely different reason. When the doors opened, he was still there. He was standing in the exact same spot, his coffee cup now empty, looking out the window. He'd been waiting. He turned as she stepped out. He saw her pale face, her wide, haunted eyes. "You knew," she whispered, tears of frustration and a strange, profound relief welling. "You knew I'd come back. I knew the world had not changed," Vincent said, his voice gentle. "I was hoping you would. And you did. What do you mean?" "You came back on your own," he said. "You're not a prisoner. Liana, you're a guest, and you just chose to stay." That night, the city of Grayford, in all its weary dysfunction, gave them a gift. A storm rolled in off the river, a tempest of black rain and high-velocity winds. At 8 o'clock, a transformer on the next block exploded in a shower of blue-green sparks. The apartment was plunged into absolute darkness. Liana cried out, a small, terrified sound from her bedroom. "I'm here," Vincent's voice called out, calm and steady from the living room. "It's just the grid." A moment later, she saw the flick of a match. A candle was lit, and then another. He was in the kitchen, his face illuminated from below, a stark, angelic, demonic figure in the gloom. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes. I don't like the dark," she admitted, emerging from her room, wrapping her arms around herself. "Me neither," he said. And she had the feeling he meant it in a way she could not understand. He lit 2 more candles and placed them on the kitchen island. The room was transformed, the sterile, modern edges softened by the flickering, warm light. "I was about to make dinner," he said, opening the refrigerator, its light the only other illumination. "The stove is gas. I think we can manage, unless you're afraid of a little culinary adventure." "What's on the menu?" she asked, surprised at how normal this felt. "Leftover pasta from yesterday, some chicken I think is still good, and a jar of olives. It will be a masterpiece." It was not a masterpiece, but it was food. They ate at the island, the storm raging outside, the candlelight making their small space a pocket of warmth. The power outage had silenced the guards' television, the hum of the appliances. There was only the sound of the rain and their own voices. They started to talk, really talk. She told him about growing up, about the father who was never home and the mother who was always tired. She told him about wanting to be a painter, a dream so old and dusty she had forgotten it existed. He listened. He actually listened. "What about you?" she asked, bold in the candlelight. "Were you ever a kid?" He smiled, a rare, small lifting of one corner of his mouth. On occasion, he told her about a father who was complicated, a man of honor and of terrible, swift violence. "I was afraid of him," Vincent admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I thought he would hurt me, but because I was afraid of becoming him." "And did you?" she asked, her voice just as quiet. He looked at his hands, resting on the counter. The knuckles on his right were still healing. In some ways. In the ways that matter. "I hope not." The conversation lulled. The rain hammered the glass. They were quiet, but it was a shared silence now, not an empty one. Liana looked at his hand, the one that had saved her, the one that had also threatened to kill. It was just a hand, large, calloused, and currently resting just inches from her own. Without thinking, without planning, she moved. She reached out and lightly, hesitantly, rested her fingers on the back of his hand. Vincent froze. He did not breathe. He was a man who had faced guns without flinching. But this small, simple touch had turned him to stone. He turned his head, his eyes dark and intense in the candlelight, locking with hers. She didn't pull away. Very slowly, as if not to frighten a wild animal. He turned his hand over and curled his fingers around hers. His hand was impossibly warm, and it dwarfed hers completely. He looked at her, his gaze unreadable, intense, searching. He was looking for something, for fear, for hesitation, for a no. He found none. He leaned in, his motion so slow and deliberate that she had 1,000 years to pull back. She met him halfway, a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. Their first kiss was nothing like the movies. It was not a spark of lust. It was not a fiery explosion. It was a quiet, aching collision. His lips were firm, and at first, it was just a soft, hesitant pressure. It was a question. She answered by not moving, by letting her own lips soften against his. It was a kiss full of pain, a kiss that acknowledged the bruises, both seen and unseen. It was a kiss of profound, shared loneliness. It deepened. Slowly, a tasting of regret and a hesitant, fragile longing for something neither of them had a name for. He pulled back after a long moment, but only by an inch. His forehead rested against hers. His eyes were closed. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The kiss had said it all. The exhaustion of the day, of her entire life, finally rolled over her. A yawn escaped her. Vincent opened his eyes. He saw her, her face soft and tired in the candlelight. He let go of her hand. "Go to sleep, Liana," he said, his voice rough. They moved to the living room, to the large couch. She sat on one end, he on the other. She curled her legs up, intending to just rest her eyes. Within 5 minutes, she was asleep. Vincent watched her, his expression unreadable. He rose, not making a sound, and retrieved a thick cashmere blanket from the hall closet. He draped it over her, carefully, tucking it around her shoulders and her feet. He did not go to his own bed. He sat in the large armchair across from her. He blew out the candles, all but one, and in the flickering light, he watched her sleep, a silent, unmoving guardian against the storm. The kiss by candlelight changed nothing and everything. The morning after the blackout. Liana woke on the couch, still wrapped in the heavy blanket, to the smell of coffee. Vincent was in the kitchen, dressed in a fresh suit, reading a report. He looked up, his face as impassive as ever, but his eyes held hers for a beat longer. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, her voice husky. The silence that followed was not awkward but full. It was the sound of a new, unspoken agreement. And so, their rhythm began. They were two wounded people, orbiting each other in the sterile, beautiful apartment, learning how to coexist. She took over the kitchen. It was a small act of control, a way to reclaim the domestic space that had once been her prison. She found that, without the shadow of Derek's moods, she actually liked to cook. She made omelets in the morning, simple salads for lunch. She found a pantry stocked with flour and yeast, and one afternoon, she baked bread. The smell filled the apartment, a scent of warmth and home that was so potent it made her ache. He was her audience of one. He ate what she made, his praise always quiet and simple. "This is good, Liana, thank you." He worked. He was ruthless. She learned. By the fragments of conversations she overheard. He took meetings in the living room while she stayed in her bedroom, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He read reports and files, his brow furrowed, a pen clicking in his hand. But when she entered the room, the hardness would recede, replaced by that quiet, watchful presence he reserved only for her. The passion that had been sparked by that first, hesitant kiss did not ignite. It smoldered. It was a slow, creeping warmth that built in the spaces between them. It was in the small things. One morning, she woke from a nightmare, a dark, suffocating dream of Derek's hands, and walked into the kitchen, trembling. He was already there, drinking coffee. He said nothing. He simply poured her a mug, his hand brushing hers as he passed it, the touch deliberate and warm. Another time. He was on a difficult call, pacing the living room, his voice sharp. "I don't care what it takes. Fix it." He hung up, his jaw tight, and stalked to the window. Liana came up beside him, holding a mug of the peppermint tea he had once made for her. She offered it. He looked from the tea to her face, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to evaporate. He took the mug, his fingers closing over hers for a long second. One morning, she emerged from the shower, toweling her hair, and realized she had left her fresh clothes in the dryer. She was wrapped in a towel, but it felt incomplete. On the back of his bedroom door, a room she had never entered, but whose door she passed every day, hung a simple, white, button-down shirt, the one he had worn a few days prior. On impulse, she slipped inside his room. It was as sparse as the rest of the apartment, smelling of him, that clean, sharp scent of citrus and wool. She took the shirt. She slipped it on. It was massive, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem falling to her mid-thigh like a dress, but it was soft, and it was warm. She rolled up the sleeves, buttoned a few buttons in the middle, and walked out. He was at the kitchen island, his back to her. "Vincent?" He turned, and he stilled. His gaze was not casual. It started at her bare feet, traveled slowly up her legs, over the white expanse of his own shirt, and finally, to her face. Her hair was still damp, and she was blushing. His coffee cup, halfway to his lips, stopped. He said nothing, but his eyes were doing all the talking. They were dark, possessive, and for the first of all, openly hungry. He watched her for a full minute, a muscle ticking in his jaw, before he cleared his throat and turned back to the counter. Later that day, she was reaching for a bowl on a high shelf. She was on her toes, the shirt riding up, her fingers just brushing the ceramic. A shadow fell over her. He was there, right behind her. "Allow me," he said, his voice a low vibration against her back. He didn't reach around her. He pressed his body against her back, his chest a solid wall of heat, and reached up easily, his arm grazing her temple. He grasped the bowl, but he didn't move away. He rested his other hand on the small of her back, his large, warm palm pressing flat against her, just above the waistband of her pants. The touch was electric. It was not gentle. It was firm. It was claiming. She stopped breathing, her hands flat against the cabinet. "Here," he whispered, his lips near her ear. He stepped back, and the cold air rushed into the space he had occupied. Her entire body was thrumming. That night, the sky broke open. A new storm, more violent than the last, threw itself at the city. The wind howled, a living thing, and the rain came down in solid, gray sheets that blurred the windows. Liana was on the couch, curled up, a book in her lap that she was not reading. Vincent was in the armchair, watching the storm, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. The air in the room was thick, charged by the weather, by the unspoken tension of the day. She set her book aside and moved. She uncurled and walked over to the armchair, sinking to the floor to sit beside his feet, leaning her back against the chair. She, too, watched the storm. For a long time, they just sat, listening to the wind's roar. "It's loud," she said, just to break the silence. "It is," he replied. She felt his hand in her hair. He had moved from the chair to the floor, kneeling beside her. She hadn't even heard him. He was so close. She could feel the heat from his body. He gathered a section of her damp hair, his fingers gentle, brushing it back from her ear. His touch was slow, deliberate. His fingertips grazed the sensitive skin of her neck, and she shivered. He leaned in, his mouth close to her ear. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice a rough, broken gravel. Liana's heart hammered. This was it. This was the precipice. She'd been here before, in a different life, where no was not an option. Here, no was the default. Yes was the choice. She turned her head, her face just inches from his. "I don't want to," she breathed. He looked into her eyes, a question. "Are you sure?" She gave him her answer. She leaned in, closing the small distance, and kissed him. This kiss was not the hesitant, pained kiss from the blackout. This one was desperate. This one was needed. His lips were firm and demanding, and she met his hunger with her own, a new, wild thing she had never known she possessed. His hand left her hair, sliding down her back, pressing her closer, while his other hand came up to cup her jaw, holding her as he deepened the kiss. It was a deluge, a drowning. He pulled back, his breath ragged. "Liana," he said, her name a prayer and a warning. He slid his hands to her waist, his grip firm. He lifted her. She weighed nothing to him. He settled her on his lap, her legs on either side of his, her body flush against his. His large hands rested on her hips, his thumbs drawing slow, agonizing circles. She could feel the hard, coiled strength of him, the heat of his body. The moment was intense, suspended. It was not lust, not in the way she had ever known it. It was a form of gravity. It was emotional permission. He was watching her face, his dark eyes searching for any sign of fear. He kissed her again, his mouth slowing, becoming tender, unhurried. He was tasting her, learning her. His hands moved from her hips, up her back, his palms flat against her, pulling her in until there was no space left between them. Her breath caught in her throat, slowly, as if she were made of priceless glass. He moved, laying her down on the thick, soft rug in front of the window, the storm a violent, swirling backdrop. He loomed over her, his body a defined, powerful shadow. He braced his weight on his forearms, caging her in. He was not a threat. He was a fortress. "You are safe," he vowed, his voice thick. She looked up at him, at this dangerous, gentle, broken man who had saved her in more ways than one. She saw the iron control he was exerting, the way his muscles were locked, holding him back. He was giving her every second to change her mind. She reached up, her hands trembling, and cupped his face. His skin was rough with a day's stubble. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. It was the truth. For the first time, in the arms of the most dangerous man she had ever met, she was not afraid. That was the key. That was the permission he had been waiting for. His control did not shatter, it melted. It dissolved into a wave of pure, unadulterated tenderness. He kissed her. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, her jaw. He kissed the scar on her lip that Derek had given her. He kissed it softly, as if he could erase the memory. Every touch was careful. Every look was a promise. He moved, his mouth tracing a line down her throat, to the hollow of her collarbone. His hands were sure, knowing as they worked the buttons of the shirt, his shirt, one by one. He was slow, agonizingly slow. He was not taking. He was asking. And her body, free and whole and her own, was finally, joyfully, answering. He laid her bare to the stormlight, and his gaze was one of reverence. He worshipped her with his hands, his mouth, his body. He taught her, in that long, dark hour, that intimacy was not about violence or control. It was about trust. It was about healing. When he finally brought their bodies together, it was a sigh, a release, a perfect, aching click of two broken pieces locking into place. It was tender. It was real. And as she wrapped her arms and legs around him, holding him as tightly as he held her, Liana, for the first time in her life, felt utterly and completely whole. Later, they lay tangled in a cashmere blanket in front of the dying storm. The rain had softened to a murmur. She was nestled in his arms, her head on his chest, her fingers idly tracing the contours of his body. His skin was a map of his life. She found a puckered, round scar on his shoulder and a long, thin, white line that disappeared under his arm. "You have a lot of scars," she murmured, her voice sleepy. He kissed the top of her head. "They are part of the job. How many fights have you won?" He was quiet for a moment. She could feel the low, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "All of them," he said, his voice a low rumble. He paused, his arm tightening around her. "Except the one that mattered." She knew, instinctively, that he was talking about the girl from the past, the reason he had come for her. She didn't press. Instead, She just held him tighter, a silent promise. The peace lasted for 12 hours. The next morning, Liana woke up alone in the bed. She had been carried. She stretched, her body aching in a new, pleasant way. She put on the white shirt again, a silent claim, and went to the kitchen. Vincent was there, but he was not the man from last night. The lover was gone. The boss was back. He was on the phone, his back to her. His voice a blade of ice. "How many?" he snapped. "Where? I want a name for every single one." He listened, his body rigid. "Find him. I don't care what it costs. Find him." He hung up, the phone clattering as he slammed it down. He did not turn. "Vincent?" Liana asked, her voice small. He turned and his face was granite. "You need to pack a bag," he said, his voice flat. "All business." "What? Why? What's happened?" That was Sal. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold with a rage she had not seen since the night he'd punched Derek. "He's out of the hospital. Derek, he's been recruiting, riling up old contacts, ex-cons, anyone who will listen." "Recruiting? For what?" "He's telling them I stole you," Vincent said, his voice laced with contempt. "He's telling them he's going to get his girl back, his property." Liana's blood turned to ice. "His property." "I have another house," Vincent said, walking past her, all energy and terrifying focus. "It's further north, off the grid. No one knows about it. You'll be safe there. We leave in 1 hour." He expected her to be afraid. He expected her to run. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, in his shirt, her body still humming from his touch. She thought of her old apartment. She thought of Derek's voice. She thought of her life, lived in a whisper. "No," she said. Vincent stopped, halfway to the door. He turned. "What did you say?" "No," she said again, her voice stronger, louder. "I'm not going. Liana, you don't understand. These are not good men. They are animals." "I understand," she said, walking toward him, her head high. "I'm tired of running. Vincent, I ran to the bathroom. I ran out of that apartment with you. I ran back here when the world got too scary." "I am not running again." She stopped in front of him, looking up into his furious, beautiful face. "This is where it stops. He's not getting his property back. He's not getting anything. I am not his, and I am not afraid of him anymore." Vincent stared at her, seeing not the victim he had rescued, but the woman who had just survived him. The woman who had, in the space of a few weeks, rebuilt herself from the ground up. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was a terrifying, proud, and utterly predatory look. "All right, Liana," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "We don't run. We fight." Vincent's declaration that they would fight, not run, changed the atmosphere in the safe house from a sanctuary to a training ground. The next morning, he introduced her to Tony, the same guard who had been looking for a pygmy puff. "Tony was a boxer for 10 years, Vincent said, his voice all business. "He will show you how to stand, how to move, and how to hit. He will not go easy on you." And he did not. They trained in the apartment's private gym, a small, mirrored room with mats and a heavy bag. The first time Tony told her to make a fist, she did it with her thumb tucked inside. "You do that, you'll break your hand on the first punch," Tony said, his voice kind but firm. He physically repositioned her fingers. "Thumb outside, always. You hit with these 2 knuckles. You hit through the target, not at it." Liana felt ridiculous. She was a waitress, not a brawler, but she remembered the weight of Derek's hand against the wall by her ear, the feeling of being cornered. She hit the padded mitt Tony was wearing. It was a weak, glancing blow. "Again," he said. "I'm trying." "No, you're not. You're afraid to hurt me. I'm not the one you're fighting." He was right. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the pad was not a pad. It was Derek's sneering face. She swung, putting her entire body, all her fear and rage, into the motion. The thwack of the impact echoed through the small room, and her hand stung, a sharp, clean pain. Tony grunted, his arm driven back. Better, again. For a week, she learned to fight. She learned how to block a punch, how to use an attacker's weight against them, how to strike at the throat, the eyes, the groin. She learned how to move with awareness, to scan a room, to listen to the silence. Then came the second lesson. Vincent took her to a private, soundproofed range in the basement of the building. The gun he placed on the table was black, heavy, and terrifying. "I do not want you to use this," Vincent said, his voice low. "I want you to never be in a position where you have to think about using this. But I will not have you be defenseless. This is a last resort. This is the wall you build when the running is over." Sal, who was a master marksman, taught her. He showed her the stance, the grip, the breathing. "Hold it with both hands," he instructed. "Firm, like you're shaking a man's hand you don't respect. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it like it's a surprise. And you never, ever point it at something you don't intend to destroy." Her first shot was deafening. Even with the ear protection, the recoil slammed her shoulder, and she missed the paper target entirely. She wanted to drop the gun and cry. "Again," Sal said. She fired, and she fired, and she fired, until her arms ached and her ears rang, until the target had a neat, tight cluster of 5 holes in the center. The tension in the apartment grew, thick and taut. Vincent watched her. He would stand in the doorway of the gym, his arms crossed, as she and Tony sparred. She was bruised, her knuckles were raw, and she was moving with a new, dangerous confidence. He was torn. He had never been more proud of her, and he had never been more terrified. His instinct was to wrap her in steel, to lock her in the highest tower and stand guard himself. He had a deep, primal need to keep her hidden, soft and safe, to protect the fragile, healing part of her that he had seen. But the woman in front of him, sweating and swearing as she landed a solid punch to Tony's ribs, was not fragile. She was a blade he had helped to sharpen. His respect for her desire for agency was at war with his need for her absolute safety. It made him short-tempered, distant. "You're hovering," she told him one night, as he watched her rub salve on her bruised knuckles. "I am observing," he replied, his voice too formal. "It's hovering," she insisted, meeting his gaze. "I'm not glass. Vincent, I'm just bruised. I'll heal." "I know," he said, the words tight, but he walked away, unable to reconcile the two women in his head, the one who had texted him for help, and the one who was now learning to be a weapon. A few days later, she was alone in the apartment. Vincent was in a meeting in his study, the heavy oak door closed. Liana was looking for something to read. The sterile apartment was short on books, but she knew he kept some in his study. She tapped on the door. There was no answer, just the low murmur of his voice on the phone. She quietly opened it. He was not there. He must have taken the call in another room. His study was the only room that felt like him. It smelled of old paper, leather, and that sharp citrus scent. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books: history, philosophy, economics. She was about to leave when she saw the bottom drawer of his desk. It was slightly ajar, just a fraction of an inch. She had no business looking. It was an invasion of his privacy, the very thing she valued so much from him. But she was drawn to it. She knelt, her heart pounding, and pulled it open. It was not filled with files or weapons. It was filled with a life he had hidden. There were a few things: a dried, pressed flower, a silver locket, tarnished, and underneath a small stack of photographs bound by a faded rubber band. Her hand trembled as she lifted them. The woman in the pictures was beautiful, with dark, curling hair and a laugh that seemed to reach off the glossy paper. She was in her early 20s. The first few photos were happy, at a street fair, on a park bench. He was in some of them, younger, his face unguarded, almost light. He was smiling. Liana had never seen him smile like that. Then the photos changed. The woman's smile became strained in the next one. She was wearing a scarf around her neck, on a day that was clearly not cold. The last photograph was a small, grainy Polaroid. The woman was not looking at the camera. She was looking at something off to the side, her eyes wide with a familiar, haunted terror. There was a dark, ugly bruise high on her cheekbone, and her lower lip was split. Liana felt the air leave her lungs. This was Maria. This was the woman he had loved, and she looked just like Liana had felt, bruised, lost. "What are you doing?" Vincent's voice was a blade of ice. Liana shot to her feet, the photos scattering on the floor. "Vincent, I'm so sorry. I was looking for a book. The drawer was open. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the Polaroid at her feet. He looked as if she had shot him. The silence was agonizing. He was not angry. He was broken. He walked into the room, his movements stiff, and knelt. He did not look at her. He gathered the photographs with a hand that was shaking. He had a hand that was shaking. The man of iron and control. "Vincent," she whispered, her own heart breaking. "Get out," he said, his voice a rasp. "Please, I didn't mean... Get out." She fled. She ran to her room and locked the door, her back sliding down the wood, her hands over her mouth as she choked back a sob. She had broken his trust. She had touched the one thing he had kept sacred, the one wound he had never let her see. Hours passed. The apartment was silent. The guards outside her door had not changed. The sun set, painting the sterile living room in shades of blood and orange. She finally emerged. The apartment was dark. He was in the living room, a solitary shadow, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had not turned on a single light. A glass of whiskey was in his hand. She walked up to him, her heart in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Vincent," she said, her voice small. "I had no right." He did not turn. He just stared at the city lights. 36 floors below. Her name was Maria, he said, his voice empty. She was everything. Young, full of life. She loved to paint. Awful paintings, full of bright, clashing colors. I loved them. He took a drink. And she loved a man who was no good, a small-time dealer with a temper. I told her to leave him. I told her he was poison. She said she could fix him. He paused, the silence stretching. "She called me," he said, his voice cracking on the single word. "One night, she was crying. He was hurting her. I told her to lock the door. I told her I was coming. I was 21. Stupid, and I thought I was invincible." He turned to Liana, and his eyes in the dim light were hollowed out, haunted. "There was an accident on the bridge," he whispered. 45 minutes. I was stuck in traffic for 45 minutes. When I got there, the door was broken. He was gone. He looked down, as if the memory was a physical weight, crushing him. "I didn't save her," he said, the words torn from his soul. "I couldn't. I was too late. I buried her, and I buried that part of myself." He looked at Liana, his gaze raw, agonizing. And then, 15 years later, "My phone vibrates. He's hurting me. Please help. It was her. It was her voice. It was her text. And I will not fail again, Liana. I will not be late. I will not let him. I will not." He was not just protecting Liana. He was redeeming Maria. Liana's heart broke. She stepped forward, into his space, and did the only thing she could. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest, holding on to him as he trembled. He did not hug her back at first. He was a man drowning, and she was an anchor. Then, slowly, his arms came up. His glass of whiskey fell to the carpet, unnoticed. He wrapped his arms around her, his grip desperate, his face buried in her hair, and he held her. That night, the air between them was electric, charged with his confession. They went to the rooftop. It was cold, the city of Grayford a glittering, indifferent carpet below them. The wind was sharp. Vincent brought 2 thick wool blankets. They sat on a stone bench, wrapped in one, the other spread beneath them. They did not speak for a long time. "You're not him," she said finally, into the dark. "What? You're not him," she repeated, turning to look at him. "You're not the man who failed. You're the man who came. You saved me. Vincent." He looked at her, his face a mask of old pain. She moved, a slow, deliberate act. She untangled herself from the blanket and shifted, turning to face him. She swung one leg over his, and then the other, straddling his lap, her knees on either side of his hips. She was still in his shirt and sweatpants. This was not about seduction. It was about closeness. She took his face in her hands, her palms cold. "You saved me." She pulled the blanket from her shoulders and wrapped it around them both, a shared cocoon against the wind. His hands, automatically, went to her hips, holding her steady, his touch firm and warm through her clothes. "You are cold," he murmured. "I don't care." She leaned in and kissed him. It was a slow, deep, healing kiss. It was not the desperate hunger of their first time. It was a promise. She kissed him with a tenderness that was meant to soothe, to erase the ghosts. She kissed his lips, his jaw, the worry lines by his eyes. "I'm here," she whispered against his mouth. "I'm not leaving. I'm not a ghost." He pulled her against him, his mouth claiming hers, a raw, desperate gratitude in his touch. He held her as if she were the only real thing in the world. His anchor in the dark. The peace was shattered 3 days later. Vincent was in his study. Liana was in the kitchen making coffee. When his phone rang, she heard his voice, a single sharp word. "What?" A moment later, he exploded from the room. His face was a thundercloud, a cold, pure rage she had never seen. "Vincent, what is it? What's wrong?" "He's a dead man," Vincent snarled. He was not speaking to her. He was just declaring, "Who? What happened?" He grabbed his overcoat, his motions jerky and violent. "Sal just called. Derek and his crew. They went to the Silken Siren." Liana knew the name. It was one of Vincent's clubs, a legitimate, high-end jazz bar on the north side. "They didn't try to get in," Vincent continued, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "They went in the back, smashed up the office, the bar. They hurt 2 of the waitresses, broke the bartender's arm. Just animals, anarchists." "Oh my God," Liana breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's not all," Vincent said, his eyes finally locking on hers. They were black with fury. He left a message. "For me." "What message?" He wrote it on the wall, in the office. Vincent's jaw was so tight, the words were barely intelligible. In blood. He hurt one of his own men to do it, just to make a point. "What did it say, Vincent?" "It said, 'She's mine.'" Vincent turned and punched the solid wall of the apartment. A spider web of cracks appeared in the plaster. He didn't even flinch. "That's it," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "We're done. I'm done playing defense. I'm done waiting for him. I'm ending this tonight." "Ending this?" Liana repeated, her blood running cold. She knew what he meant. He was going to kill him. "Tony, Sal," he roared. His men were there in seconds. "Get the car, get the tools. We're going to find him, and we're going to put him in the river." "No," Liana shouted, and the men, and Vincent, all froze, stunned by her voice. She ran to him, grabbing the front of his suit. "No, Vincent, you can't. Get out of my way, Liana. This is my world. This is what I do." "No," she cried, tears welling. She was not afraid of him. She was terrified for him. "Look at you. This is what he wants. He wants to drag you down, to make you an animal, just like him. You kill him like this, in cold blood. You go to jail, or worse. You become him. You become the man you were afraid of." He stared at her, his chest heaving, his rage warring with the truth of her words. "Please," she begged, her hands clutching his coat. "Those women, the bartender. They need justice. I need justice. Not a back alley murder, not revenge, justice. For Maria. For me. Please. Vincent, don't let him win. Don't let him turn you into him." He looked at her, at the tears on her face, at the strength in her eyes. She was right. He was letting his past, his rage, dictate his actions. He was about to fail her again, in a different way. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The black, homicidal rage receded, replaced by a cold, sharp, calculating focus. He placed his hands over hers, on his chest. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet. "Not revenge." He looked at Sal. "Call it off. No tools. But find him. I want him." He looked back at Liana, his eyes now clear and utterly ruthless. "We won't kill him. We'll give him exactly what he deserves. Justice." The plan was set. Justice. Vincent's justice, however, looked very different from a courtroom. He used his network, a complex web of informants and street-level eyes, to put a new story in motion. He let it be known to the right, untrustworthy people that a significant, unscheduled arms shipment was being moved through the old Grayford Rail Depot. It was a fake trade, designed to attract exactly one kind of person: the greedy, the desperate, and the stupid. He was dangling $1 million prize in front of a man who had never seen more than 1,000. Derek, high on his victory at the jazz club and desperate to build his new army, would not be able to resist the night of the trade. The air in the safe house was thick with a tension that was almost suffocating. Vincent was checking his own weapon, a sleek, dark pistol, his movements economical and precise. Sal and Tony were dressed in dark, functional clothing, all trace of their bodyguard suits gone. Liana stood in the doorway, already dressed. She was wearing a simple black turtleneck, dark jeans, and combat boots Tony had provided. "It's time," Vincent said, not looking at her. "Tony will stay here with you." "No," Liana said. The men stopped. Vincent slowly looked up, his face a mask of cold patience. "Liana, this is not a discussion. This is the part of my world you do not need to see." "You're right," she said, walking into the room. "I don't need to see it, but I am going to be part of it. He left that message for me. He hurt those people because of me. I am not hiding in this apartment while you fight my battles." "This is not a battle," Vincent said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is an extermination. You are not a soldier. I am his victim," she shot back, her voice ringing with a strength that made him pause. "And I am your partner. You don't get to treat me like a princess in a tower one night and a prisoner the next. I'm not that girl. Vincent, not anymore. I'm not asking. I am coming." He stared at her, seeing the iron in her spine, the absolute unbending will. He saw the woman who had charged him with being a better man, and he saw the woman who would not ask him to do what she was unwilling to face herself. He was terrified, and he was in awe. "Damn it," he breathed, turning to Sal, who was watching with a carefully neutral expression. "Get her the vest." Sal nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. He returned with a heavy, black Kevlar vest. Liana put it on without flinching, her face set. Vincent himself adjusted the straps, his hands firm, his touch betraying his anxiety. "You do exactly what I say," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "You stay behind cover. You stay with Sal. You do not move. You do not speak. Do you understand me?" "I understand," she said. "Let's go." The abandoned warehouse was a cathedral of rust and decay, smelling of rainwater and pigeons. It was a vast, cavernous space, with shadows clinging to the high-raftered ceiling. A few dim floodlights, set up by Vincent's men hours earlier, cast pools of sickly yellow light. Vincent, Liana, Sal, and Tony, plus 2 other men, were positioned on a high metal catwalk, concealed behind a stack of rusted oil drums. They had a perfect, commanding view of the warehouse floor below. "He's late," Tony whispered. "He's not late," Vincent said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "He's trying to be smart. He's not," as if summoned. A metal door on the far side of the warehouse screeched open. Derek appeared, silhouetted against the night. He was not alone. He had 4 other men with him, a pathetic crew of twitchy, strung-out ex-convicts, all of them armed with a mix of bats and small-caliber handguns. They looked more like rats than a gang. Derek, however, was full of a manic, drug-fueled energy. He was wearing a new leather jacket, and he strode to the center of the warehouse, his hands shoved in his pockets. "All right," he yelled, his voice echoing in the huge space. "We're here! Where's the merchandise?" No one answered. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaking roof. "I'm not playing games! Moretti!" Derek shouted, his confidence wavering, replaced by a note of paranoia. "I know you're here. Show yourself. Show me the guns, or I'm walking." "You're not walking anywhere." "Derek," Vincent's voice boomed, amplified by the warehouse acoustics. He stepped out from the shadows, not on the catwalk, but on the ground floor, 20 yards away. He was alone. Derek's men all raised their weapons, their hands shaking. "Just you, huh?" Derek sneered, his bravado returning. "Big man, big boss. You gonna take us all on yourself?" "I don't need my men to handle you," Vincent said, his voice calm, almost bored. "I'm just here to deliver a message." "Yeah? What?" "Your bill is due. You vandalized my property. You assaulted my staff. And you made the mistake of putting your hands on something that was never, ever yours." Derek laughed, a high, ugly sound. "She was mine. She is mine. She's my property, and you stole her. You think you can just take what's mine? I made her. She was nothing before me." "Vincent," Liana whispered from the catwalk, her voice shaking, not with fear, with rage. "Stay put," Sal said, his hand on her arm. "He's lying," Derek screamed, his mind clearly unraveling. "She's a whore. She's a snake. She probably texted you, didn't she? Begging for it. She'll turn on you, too. Moretti, she's poison." That was the last word he would say, unchallenged. "No," a new voice called out. "Liana, no," Vincent barked, his head snapping up to the catwalk, but she was already moving. Liana shrugged off Sal's hand and stepped into the light of the catwalk, her face a mask of cold fury. She was not the trembling girl from the kitchen. She was not the victim. She was a queen, and she was looking down on a fool. "She's right here, Derek," Liana said, her voice clear and carrying in the vast space. Derek's face went from rage to disbelief, and then to a sick, twisted kind of joy. "Liana, baby, see? I told you she'd come. She knows where she belongs. Come on down, baby, come back to me. I'll even forgive you for this mess." "I'm not coming back to you," Liana said, her voice like ice. "I am not your baby. I am not your property. I am not anything to you. You are a small, pathetic man who thinks hitting a woman makes him strong. You are a coward. You bitch," Derek shrieked, his mask of control completely gone. He was exposed, and he was feral. "I'll kill you. I'll kill him." He pulled a gun, but he wasn't a gunman. He was a brawler. With a roar of pure, primal rage, he did not shoot. He lunged at Vincent, the man who had taken his power, but he didn't have a gun in his hand. He had a blade. It was a long, cruel-looking hunting knife. "Vincent!" Liana screamed. Vincent was already moving. He had his own gun out, but Derek was on him in seconds, a frenzied, screaming animal. Vincent, a trained fighter, would have disarmed and disabled him in an instant, but Derek was not aiming for Vincent. In that split second, Vincent saw Derek's wild eyes shift. He wasn't lunging at Vincent. He was lunging past him, toward Liana, who was now halfway down the metal staircase. He was going to take her, to mark her, to finish this. Vincent didn't think. He reacted, he moved, not as a fighter, but as a shield. He threw himself in front of Liana, who was on the bottom step. He intercepted Derek's lunge with his own body. Liana screamed as the blade sank into Vincent's side, a sickening, wet sound. Derek roared in triumph. Vincent grunted, a deep sound of pain, and his arms, on pure instinct, wrapped around Derek in a crushing hold. Liana did not freeze. Her training, her rage, her love, all coalesced into a single, clarifying moment. She had a pistol, the one Sal had given her. Tucked into the back of her vest, she ripped it out. She didn't have time to aim. Derek was struggling, trying to pull the knife free. "Get off him!" she shrieked. She jammed the muzzle of the pistol against Derek's leg, far away from Vincent's body, and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening, a cannon blast in the warehouse. Derek screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound she had never heard, and collapsed, clutching his thigh, which was instantly blossoming with blood. The knife clattered to the concrete floor. The warehouse exploded. Tony and Sal and the other two men were on the floor in seconds, their own weapons out. Derek's crew, who had only been loyal to a paycheck that didn't exist, dropped their weapons instantly, their hands flying into the air. It was over in 10 seconds. Liana didn't see any of it. She only saw Vincent. He was on his knees, his face pale, his left hand pressed hard against his side. Blood, dark and thick, was pouring through his fingers. "Vincent, oh my God, Vincent!" she sobbed, falling to her knees in front of him. She tore off her vest, her hands fumbling. "Hey," he rasped, his eyes finding hers. He was trying to smile. You didn't stay behind cover." "Don't talk," she cried, pressing her hands over his, trying to stem the bleeding. The blood was hot, so hot, and there was so much of it. "Sal, Tony, help me." He's bleeding. Ambulance is on the way, boss. Sal was already on the phone, his voice calm. He looked at Liana. Hold him. Keep pressure. You're okay. Don't leave me, Liana sobbed, her tears a hot rain on his face. He was slumping, his head growing heavy. Do you hear me? Vincent Moretti, you do not get to save me and then leave me. I just got you. I just got you. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain, but full of a love that was fierce and absolute. Maria, he whispered, his eyes closing. No, Liana said, her voice a roar. No, my name is Liana, and you are not leaving me. Stay with me. Stay with me, Vincent. His eyes fluttered open. He saw her. Really saw her. Liana, he said, his voice clear. Okay. He was still conscious when the paramedics arrived, his hand still holding hers. The weeks that followed were a new kind of quiet. Vincent survived. The blade had missed his vital organs by a fraction of an inch, but it had been a close, ugly wound. He refused to stay in the hospital and was brought back, not to the safe house, but to a sprawling, warm, and very real home in the hills above Grayford, a home filled with books and art and a massive, comfortable-looking couch. His home. The charges against Derek and his crew were a mountain. Assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, conspiracy, and, thanks to Sal's careful discoveries, a half-dozen unrelated warrants, he would be gone for a very, very long time. Liana did not leave Vincent's side. She changed his bandages. She cooked for him. Rich, healing broths. She read to him when the pain medication made his eyes blur, and when he was strong enough, she helped him walk. He would lean on her, his arm draped over her shoulders, his large body supported by her small, strong frame. They would walk the hallways, one slow step at a time. Their love, which had been forged in crisis and fire, was now being tempered in the quiet, domestic day-to-day. It was deeper, quieter, and unshakable. It was built on earned peace. You're a terrible patient, she grumbled one afternoon as he tried to walk to his study on his own. I'm a terrible prisoner, he countered, leaning heavily against the doorframe, a small grin on his face. Then it's a good thing I'm the warden. She slid under his arm and he leaned on her, his warmth a familiar, welcome weight. Come on, one more lap, then you can read your boring reports. They are not boring, he said. They are incredibly boring. She laughed, and he laughed with her. One evening, weeks later, he was fully recovered. The fire was roaring in the massive stone fireplace. He was on the couch, finally reading one of his boring reports. Liana was curled in a large armchair opposite him, a novel in her lap. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the rustle of pages. She looked at him over the top of her book. He was magnificent, strong, safe, and entirely hers. A slow smile spread across her face. She reached for her phone, which was on the table beside her. She typed a quick message. Across the room, Vincent's phone vibrated on the cushion. He looked at it, annoyed by the interruption. He picked it up, his brow furrowed. Then he looked up, his eyes finding hers. A slow, utterly breathtaking smile spread across his face, a real, unguarded smile. The one she had only seen in old photographs. The text message read, "He's hurting me by not kissing me fast enough." He set the report down. He stood. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, a man who was no longer in pain, no longer a ghost. Liana laughed as he reached her. "Vincent, I was just—" He did not let her finish. He lifted her, one arm under her legs, the other behind her back, scooping her out of the chair as if she weighed nothing. She yelped, laughing, her arms flying around his neck. "Vincent, what are you doing?" "Answering an emergency," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. He carried her out of the living room toward the bedroom. He was laughing softly, and she was, too. For the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was afraid. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Liana and Vincent. Where in the world are you listening from? I would love to know. Please leave a comment below and tell me. And if you love stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an update. Your thoughts and feedback are so important, so please share your thoughts on the story in English. Thank you again and see you next time.